are listening to Rootbound, a podcast about plants for when you're stuck inside.
Rootbound gets sponsorship from GourdVPN. Did you know that you can produce vessels for holding water, soil, or just about anything in your own backyard? Gourds are nature's vessels. Use gourds today for secure vessel production this harvest season. GourdVPN. Vessel production naturally.
Hello to everyone out there. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Rootbound. I'm your host, and my name is Steve. Before we get into the interview segment on today's episode, I wanted to talk a little bit about the philosophy of Rootbound. It's something that's been evolving as we've recorded more shows, and it's something that's solidifying a little bit more, I think. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that at the top of the show. If you would have asked me back when I started the podcast, hey Steve, why plants? I probably would have said something like, well, I'm just really into plants now, and I want to talk about them. I was definitely inspired by my friends Maggie and Ashley's podcast, The Watering Hole, where they tell each other about animals. And since I'm really into plants now, I thought, well, why don't I do something similar with plants? And instead of having, a co-host, let me invite other people to come talk about plants, because I really just like talking to other people, and it's a good excuse to reach out to old friends or make new friends. And that sounded great to me. I'm totally a people person. So that's how it kind of started. But as we've recorded more episodes and I've heard from all these different people about plants that mean something to them, I think my philosophy behind the program has evolved a bit. And now if you were to ask me, hey Steve, why plants? I think I would say something more like, outside of other human beings, our relationship with plants is more fundamental than anything else. If you think about the other living things that we interact with on a daily basis, besides other humans, plants are right there. If animals, how many animals do you truly interact with on a day-to-day basis? I mean, we all have pets. Some of us eat the meat from animals. Those are relationships we have with animals. But, think about the plants we interact with. I mean, we eat so many more kinds of plants. We interact with plants on a daily basis, and you're walking across the grass, and you're walking under a tree. Even in the city, there's weeds popping up from the sidewalk. They're all around us all the time. We rely on them for things like building materials, our clothing, food, as I mentioned before, and the air we breathe is coming from plants. So that relationship with plants is really fundamental. And so talking to people about plants that mean something to them, I think is a great way to explore our relationship with plants. And I think, in our modern society, that relationship is sometimes downplayed a little bit or looked over or taken for granted. And I think for me, this podcast has been a great way to analyze that and to think about it and maybe improve my relationship with plants. And, there are people out there around the world who have a stronger relationship with plants. And I think it starts with just thinking about it and thinking about plants. And so that's, I think, the philosophy behind this podcast. We have such a strong connection with plants, so let's explore it with each other. Let's talk to each other about plants, and maybe we can all grow our relationship with plants together, which I think this episode is a great example of that in the interview segment. And just one little production note, there was some unavoidable construction in the background, so if you hear any electric screwdrivers going, apologies for that, but I don't think it's too distracting. Let's meet our guest.
Since the dawn of human creation, we have looked to plants to nourish us with their flesh, shelter us with their fiber, and enrich our world with their beauty.
Hi, Nancy Ray. Thanks for joining me on this episode of Rootbound.
Hi, Steve. I'm really happy to be here, and thank you for providing such an interesting platform for your listeners and fellow plant lovers.
Thanks so much. Do you have a plant to share with us today?
I do. Today I'd like to talk about sage.
Wonderful. I'm excited to learn more about sage from you. And so actually, spoiler alert, I'm also going to talk about sage today, but I think you're talking about a specific kind of sage, and I'm curious if that is the case.
Yes, actually, there are three specific speciations of sage that we use as the Na Dene, or Southern Athabascan, more commonly known as Apache people.
Cool. Oh, so wow, I didn't actually realize there were three. What are those three?
Yeah, so I'm not going to talk about the two that we actually commonly use, but I am going to talk about one that everybody's been using, which is the Salvia apiana. The Salvia apiana, or more commonly white sage, is the white desert sage that's most commonly being used for sails and used for smudging. And I think that's the one that most people kind of think about, or it comes to mind and heart, if they've been to powwows or to other ceremonies of Lakota or other relatives of our Native American tribes.
Very interesting. Yes, I'm a little bit familiar with white sage. Of course, I've seen people using it for smudging, as you said. And maybe you could actually define smudging in a little bit, because I'm not sure everyone understands what that is. But I also used to live in the desert in California, and so I had seen some of it then, or at least I think it was the white sage. But I'm excited to learn more about it, and I know that I know that it's can be a very complicated topic, particularly with how it's harvested.
Yes, and I really appreciate the sensitivity to that. In our Apache or Na Dene Southern Athabascan traditions, we don't ever just take. There is always a method of protocol and etiquette, especially when it comes to our beautiful plant relatives. In our traditions of Apache ways of seeing things, we believe that every being has its own sentient life, and so that also includes white sage.
Very interesting. I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit more and what that means for when someone is harvesting sage to use.
Yeah, I've had a lot of non-native friends who've asked about this particular topic. And sometimes it's difficult because we don't always, as Native people, have a protocol to include people outside of our own blood relations or our own relatives in this knowledge. But specifically with sage, there's a certain protocol, meaning a way or a method that everything is harvested. One of the things that we have seen is, people will see the plant, they get super excited. Sometimes it grows over 6 feet tall in the desert, and they've seen it at ceremony, and, they're non-native, they don't know any better, and they go out there and they just pluck it from the earth, and they just say, yes, I've got sage, and I'm so excited, and I'm going to dry it, and I'm going to use this as medicine. But the process of medicine begins way before you even come to place your feet on the earth in the desert, or your hands even near the sage. There's prayer, there's requesting permission, and I think that's a really important protocol that we learn as Na Dene or Southern Athabascan children. We are always taught that we keep our hands to ourselves, that we never take anything without being invited, and that we always pray and request consent from those ancestors that have taught us the medicine who have traveled before us. So a protocol is just that understanding of how we interact with our plant relatives, not just taking or just plucking it from the earth and getting super excited, but having more reverence, taking time to really think about what we are doing sustainably, what we are doing conscientiously, and then how that process is also part of medicine.
That is really interesting and really well said. That's something that I'm trying to think about more. I'm starting to get into foraging and this idea of going into nature and collecting wild plants. And I think I'm always trying to be very conscious of not to take too much. But I think there's also the thing that I'm lacking is this being more like in communication with the plants, right? And like this idea of asking permission. So that's really interesting to me. And I wonder if you have any thoughts about just daily interactions with plants. Like what are some steps that some people can go to, like, I don't know, be more thoughtful in the way they engage with wild plants?
I think, I really love that question, Steve, because you're starting to demonstrate two very important human becoming or human being traits. One is compassion, and the other is consent. One of the things that I've noticed that's a difference in my culture is that it's very strict in terms of how the sun comes to be carried in the morning, how we greet the day with gratitude, how we see that every living item, if you want to call it an item, being, object, a classification of life, has its own energy. And so if you think about a seed and start with something as simple as, let's say, a sage seed, it's very small, almost as small as a mustard seed. But when we plant it, we don't simply just, dig in the earth and throw it in there and walk away and wait to see what happens. In our culture, we look over the ground. We know this is our ancestors who have been buried or have been lifted in smoke across the entire continent, that the land is our mother, that we place a new life inside of her, and we place it in an area where there's sunlight and water and wind. And so when we think about how life becomes, right, we think about all of this energy, we want to take a moment and pause and be in gratitude for that. So in a native culture, that would be a song. It would be a song we're taught from our grandmothers that we would sing to the seed as we placed it, covered it, watered it, came back to it each morning and thought of it with love. Very similar to parenting, or very similar to how you might think of taking care of your dog or your cat or even your goldfish. Some people like reptiles, but all life. So treating plants with that same regard of speaking to it. What do we say to something that we ask for permission? We say, to the sage or to the juniper tree, I'm simply a humble human being that requires sustenance or medicine from you, and I'm asking your permission to exchange our lives together, my breath, your life, so that we might heal my body and my mind and my hands to become stronger, so that I may plant again. So it's a reciprocal thought of compassion. It's a reciprocal thought of becomingness, and giving the plant the same respect that you would give yourself.
Very well said. I think I get that. I'm gonna in my own time work through that. But I think that's very, very well said. Maybe getting back a little bit to sage, and you mentioned medicine, and I feel like I talked about this in an episode a while ago. I feel like there's lots of different concepts for the word medicine, and I think, for my culture, you think of medicine as something that comes in a bottle, and it's specifically for, like, you have a sore throat, you take some medicine for that. And I'm wondering if, maybe in general, but maybe particularly in regards to white sage, if you could talk about that definition of medicine.
Yes. So in our culture's definition of medicine, it is a process of healing. It is something external to you, whether it's a song, a plant, a place, or a feeling. That's why we refer to mind, the body, spirit, those interconnections with the greater of creation, and how those qualities of the human become healed through the process of introduction of the medicine. So let's take an idea like penicillin. That comes from mold. That comes from a plant, right? So in order for it to heal our bodies, it has to go through a process to become a tablet or a liquid, right? And then we take that plant and we put it in our bodies, and it finds our little genetic codes, our molecules, and it figures out what is us and what is not us, and it simply removes what is not us so that the body can heal. And so, medicine is then an external plant product that we have changed and modified, placed into our bodies, and our bodies then enter a process of becoming well again from whatever illness or disease. With white sage, it does that not only for human beings, but it does that for the earth. It actually helps to cleanse and pull toxins from the earth, and that's why it's so important to leave root structures intact and never just tug it out of the earth, right? It's important to have permission from whoever's ancestral land you're on. And trust me when I say the reservations are not that far away from any mountain or national site. But it's a process of asking that permission of something external to enter the body, mind, and spirit to help cleanse it, remove toxins. So similar in definition, just a different way of kind of looking at it because we need the plants directly in our culture.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think maybe I think we jumped right into some super philosophical stuff, which I really enjoyed. But maybe getting back at a little bit of basics, I wonder if can you describe white sage to someone who's never seen it before? I think a lot of us are familiar with sage, at the supermarket. But what is white sage, and how is it different, and what does it look like?
Sure. So the sage that we can find at the supermarkets, that comes from a European seed. So it doesn't have the same essential oils. It doesn't have the same texture. So if you were to look at that sage, it's kind of warty, or it has little bumps along it, right? It kind of is white, green, and silver. And I'm using that because that's what we're most familiar with. If you were looking at white sage, you would be looking specifically in the desert. You would be looking for something 6 feet tall, so something usually taller than yourself. And it would have to be in full sunlight. And when it's in full sunlight, the undercurrent of green is covered by the medicine, and it's a white, downy, kind of very soft feel. The leaves are extended longer. Sometimes they're frayed into 3 prongs. Sometimes they're a very nice edge to it. And with it being that large, you're going to think about the stems. Now, in common garden sage or European sage, the stems are edible. They're kind of thin, you can chew them, not too bad. But with white desert sage, it's woody. So you're looking more kind of like a shrub consistency. If you're looking at 6 feet tall, you're looking at larger leaves, you're looking at, fully in the desert. It's not going to be usually something that is soft. It's going to be more of a woody type branch in the center. And the smell is going to be very different. It's going to actually have a medicinal smell, whereas sage from European sage has kind of a sweet scent that makes you really want to put it in your mouth, especially when you're eating sausage, right? So this is, even though white sage is something you could eat, it's not something that we would typically put into food the way we use European sage. It's a different process of medicine.
Very interesting. And then maybe we touched on this a little bit, but I know at least a little bit that one of the major issues with white sage is this issue of over-harvesting or inappropriate harvesting. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that or any guidelines. I think I've definitely seen like white sage at Whole Foods bundled up, and I've always wondered what the deal with that was. Do you have anything to say about that over-harvesting or any issues like that?
I do. Actually, I would ask every listener to take a moment, take a deep breath, and think about consideration. What most people don't understand about the areas that they're in, they'll walk out and say, this is a wild blackberry plant. This is wild sage. But in the actuality, if you were to study history prior to 150 years ago here in southeast Colorado, our families planted in groups along mountains and along rivers these medicines, and that's why you come across fields of them instead of just maybe 1 or 2 plants, because this has been happening for over 30,000 years. So we as Apache people usually request that you don't harvest white sage, that if you do see it in grocery stores, that you choose to go with more of rosemary or lavender or garden sage, something that's more familiar to your own genetics. And that's for 2 reasons, actually. One is allergic reaction. Not every plant is made for every person. And white sage specifically, used by northern, eastern, and midwestern tribes, was planted with prayer. It was planted with the thought process that it would be used in ceremonies. It's planted in the process of long-term sustainability. So what would help right now, specifically, as we look at white sage, it would be to continue to plant the seeds instead of take. It would be to give right now instead of take. And that's a normal Apache concept. There's a season to plant, and then 3 seasons later there's a harvest. There's a season to then replant, and another 3 to 4 years, another season to harvest. And the reason for that is because we want to give the consideration to the plant to have enough time to grow and to mature. So we would ask not to harvest, but to plant.
Yeah, that makes sense. I definitely think it makes sense to not harvest something, particularly if it's not something that you have a cultural connection to, and particularly if people who do are asking you not to. So I think that's really well said. Do you have any other fun facts or dazzling details about white sage to share with us?
I do. A lot of people, we had talked about smudging. What is smudging? So smudging is a process by which a dried plant is usually burned with fire on charcoal or sometimes freestanding. Meaning, I've seen people take an entire bundle of sage and light the end on fire, which always concerns me. It's best to conserve sage if you are going to smudge, or even lavender or rosemary, which is another, those are plants that we actually recommend for our European and American friends to use. But the interesting thing about white sage is it helps with parasites if it's taken internally, which is one of the more common uses for it. It's also uplifting for your mood just to smell it. So if somebody gives you a gift of sage, right? Because that happens, you have a friend and they know you love plants and they do go to Whole Foods and they do pick up one of those things. Let's say you get one of those. What can you do with it? You can just simply hold it and smell it. You can definitely take it to a powwow and give it to an elder or a child. They would really appreciate that as a gift. You can re-gift sage. That's a beautiful thing to do. But it's actually a sign of peace. And that's why we're asking not to pluck it, but to plant it. If we can plant it and we can share it, it will be more abundant for everybody in the future. And in the meantime, you can use Sylvia officinalis, right, the European sage, or Sylvia azurea, which is another blue sage, or we call grandmother sage, which is often blended into the white sage. Definitely for your own homes, lavender is beautiful, fresh or under the bed for smudging. Fresh under the bed or smudging. Don't try to smudge it under your bed. That could cause problems.
Good call.
Sprouting plants through billions of tiny lips give forth oxygen to purify the air and invigorate the earth. Spreading across the planet, a matrix of green, allowing all life to flourish.
What other questions can you think of about sage? Did you have any others?
I think I was going to move into a little bit, and you covered it here, because, normally on the show we talk about 2 plants. You share a plant and I share a plant. And I think we're going to do that today, but it's going to be a little bit different because I was going to talk a little bit about the European sage.
Great.
Because I'm growing that in my garden, and it is one of my favorite herbs. And I was, in preparation for you talking about white sage, I thought I would compare and contrast the two. And there's just a couple of little things that popped out at me that I think are very interesting. And you may know some of these, but bear with me. Maybe I'll surprise you a little bit. But you did mention its scientific name, which is Salvia officinalis. I think you said that white sage is Salvia apiana, which I think means bee sage. Correct?
You've got it.
Great. Which is actually very interesting. Maybe we can talk about that in a minute. I'm a beekeeper, so I'm always interested in anything bee related. Actually, maybe let's get back to that. But Salvia officinalis, one, I always like talking about the names of plants, and I think that's really interesting, the names and what we call plants. And this one in particularly has an interesting thing to me. But that name salvia, first of all, is from Latin, which means healthy. So its historical use in Europe has been in medicine as well, which I find to be very interesting. These 2, plants in disparate continents, but have a similar background and being used for similar things. And then that second name, officinalis, which sounds first like official. I read the etymology, and it's a little bit more complicated than that. It actually is something that belongs to an officina, which is the the name for the herb room in a monastery.
Yes.
And Carl Linnaeus gave that name officinalis to plants that are commonly used in food or in medicine. But the thing I was thinking about, and I think we hear all about with plant names, is that the names we give plants reflect the dominant culture. And here we have this system of binomial nomenclature for naming plants that automatically puts the common European sage kind of above every other sage, because it's the one that the Europeans knew. And so when they started naming things, so we have this name for this thing, which is Salvia officinalis, which makes it sound much more important than Salvia apiana. And I think that's a really interesting way to think about how what we call something can influence how people think about it. And I think that's something to think about when you hear the name of something. I always like to think about, well, what else is it called? What do people from the area call it? And so that's a very interesting thing to me. And I thought it was interesting to compare these two sages. There's no reason why one sage is better than the other, or more of the common sage. I mean, that's people call Salvia officinalis common sage, but I think, where you're from, white sage is much more common. So anyway, I was thinking about that with names of them. The cultivar of sage I have is called Berggarten sage, which is German for mountain garden sage. And it's a really lovely variety. It's got these big leaves, very flavorful. It stays kind of short, which is nice. And it's just a very lovely cultivar. And I got it at the farmer's market a few years ago, and it grows really great here in Northern Virginia, so that's good. A couple things about the uses. It's one of those plants. I feel like a lot of the most common plants we know about, at least from European culture, they can cure anything, right? Like when you list like what they're good for, they're like, well, they're good for all these things, which is true for sage. It was used for a cure-all for almost things. But the one that is the one that's not as common and came up in several different places is apparently it's good for memory. And there's also been scientific studies that show that, taking a tea of common sage can help with your memory. So I'm going to try that. I've never actually had sage tea, but it sounds interesting to me.
I actually love sage tea, and I use the 4 different varieties depending on what the need is. But I will say that I do recommend the common sage as a tea over, say, like a pontica, which is another type of salvia, right? It's another type that we actually share in common, European and the Turtle Island. We both have that plant, and that was more commonly used by the French. And they used it in absinthe. It was one of the main ingredients as a parasitical in absinthe for the French army, and that's how they also survived malaria. So common sage, I would say, not only good for memory, but for cleaning the lymph system, cleaning the digestive tract if you added a little of that blue sage to it. So again, depending on the need or the use. But yeah, I love sage tea. I love actually a sage broth. We recommended a sage and garlic broth with bone broth for the marrow to help boost the immune system and help cleanse anything else that might be in there bacterially, so that you'd have virus clearance. So interesting. Steve, that was really, I did learn some things from you.
Very, very good. And actually, maybe one last thing, which I thought was super interesting, is that I have a quote here that says, although common sage or European sage is widely cultivated, more than half of the world's supply is still wild collected in places like Albania, Bosnia, Herzegovina, Croatia, Serbia, and Montenegro. And because of that, it has faced over-harvesting as well, and governments have had to step in and ask people to stop harvesting. And so those parallels between these plants, I thought was very fascinating.
I think that's fascinating too, because it shows that what is commonly needed is that we all take an accountable responsibility together for those plants that we both cultivate and that have been planted by ancestors in Europe and as well as North America. And I think that common respect and that reverence for plants is really what's going to help us create more plants in the future and give them a happy and healthy earth so that they can abundantly live to thrive, so that we have access to them for medicine as two-legged people.
Very well said. Before we go, I just wanted to just change the subject just a little bit and just ask about, your herbal wellness thing you have going on, and what, maybe tell the audience a little bit about what you're doing over there in Colorado.
Sounds great. So I co-founded an organization called Herbal Gardens Wellness. I have Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, which is an epilepsy condition of my mitochondrial DNA. I've had it my whole life. And we wanted to find a way to do three things: provide education on botanical pharmacology and access for Native people and our European rural friends that we have everywhere here in the mountains. Gardens to teach anthropogenic gardening. We don't teach permaculture. We actually teach a very old form of 30,000-year-old gardening, and take people through orchards here in the mountains that were planted by our grandfathers. And then wellness, that balance of body, mind, spirit, and intellect, stimulating, learning how to be and how to become connected and well to creation in our own way, not just Apache way, but in a European way. Netherlands, we have friends from the Netherlands, we have friends from Australia, we've got friends from Russia, Ukraine, China. I mean, we have friends all over the world. And one of the things that we all have in common is that plants are medicine and plants are food. And the more we have reverence for them together, as we teach at Herbal Gardens Wellness, the better future we have, not only for our own longevity, but for the longevity of the 7 generations to follow us.
Wonderful. Well, I think that says it all. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Rootbound, and we'll talk to you again soon, hopefully.
It was fun, Steve. Thank you. I learned a lot from you, and this is a great show. Hello to all your listeners, and many blessings to you each. And remember, plant, don't pluck white sage.
Here's a tip. Put a pinch of sage in your boots, and all day long a spicy scent is your reward.
Just having a nice cup of sage tea here. And I think it's helping with... What is it supposed to help with again? Oh, right. That's right. Memory. Got it. Little joke. Anyway, I've never really had sage tea before, so I thought I would try it here after our conversation with Nancy Ray. And just a little note, if you want to learn more about Nancy Ray's nonprofit, Herbal Gardens Wellness, you can visit herbalgardenswellness.org and learn more about them. And if you're interested, you can also donate to the nonprofit there, which I highly recommend. One little thing that we forgot to get into in the conversation with Nancy Ray was about the scientific name for white sage, which is Salvia apiana, which I mentioned means bee sage. And that's really interesting because it's a plant that bees are really attracted to. But the one little fun beekeeper fact that I often find myself bringing up when I'm talking with non-beekeepers is the fact that the honeybee, the one we all know, the one that we get honey from, is not native to the continent called North America. It is from Europe and Africa. And so when this is called bee sage, it's not talking about the honeybee. It's talking about the variety of other native bees in Colorado and in the deserts all around the western part of this continent that are highly attracted to white sage. So I think that's a really fun fact to think about, and I think those other bees don't get enough credit for what they do. They don't live in as big of hives as honeybees. Some of them are just solitary. They live completely by themselves. Some of them, if you're not looking closely, you might confuse them with a fly. But there are more species of solitary bees and bumblebees and carpenter bees than there are honeybees. In fact, there's only 8 species of honeybee, and the other kinds of bees just dwarf that. But we give the honeybee a lot of credit, which it deserves credit. It's a cool bug. But I think we maybe give it a little bit too much credit just because we love the honey so much. I do. I love the honey, but I also trying to always remember those other bees and the hard work they do to pollinate plants, not just white sage and not just in Colorado, but all over the world. Bees do a lot of work, not just honeybees, but all bees. something to learn. Maybe you didn't know that their honeybees are not native to North America. I find people don't know that often. They're a little bit more like a cow or a chicken. They're an imported agricultural species, but that doesn't mean they're not important. I'm a beekeeper. I keep them, so they definitely are important. But it's fun to know the like history behind animals and plants and how they got to be where they are. So yeah, I think that name Salvia appiana kind of sparked that in my memory, and thought I would share that with you all today. And I think that's it. Thanks for listening. We'll talk soon. My guest on this episode of Rootbound was Nancy Ray Cochise Clark. Nancy Ray is Na-Dene Southern Athabascan, commonly known as Southeastern Colorado Apache. Nancy Ray is the co-founder of Herbal Gardens Wellness, a traditional native healthcare lifestyle medicine organization. You can learn more about the organization at herbalgardenswellness.org. Rootbound is hosted by Steve Ellington, grower of the Berggarten Sage. Music by Christian Kriegesgota. Fake ads by David Lonnie. Rootbound is a podcast about plants for when you're stuck inside, but if you can go outside, just don't pluck the white sage.
Gourd VPN. Vessel production naturally.